I just did that because I like how that sounds. Hi, I am just being a random person doing random things. I'm going to be just reading from right here. I'm just gonna read it. I guess it's like a free audiobook. If you didn't want the whole audiobook, or if you did buy the audiobook but you don't know when to like pause it and like start it to get to like the part you want. So I'm just going to leave off where season one left off, and I'll just keep reading until I get tired of reading. And yeah, let's spoil season two for no reason at all. This would be the time to take a shot. Um, but that was just me wetting my whistle. What's in the background here? A charger. Let's take this out. All right, too much echo, too much echo. That was for the sound of the flame, but now we don't need too much echo. I'm so professional. Got my headphones. Listen. Aemon Targaryen, who would henceforth be known as Aemon the Kinslayer to his foes, returned to King's Landing, having won the support of Storm's End for his brother Aegon and the undying enmity of Queen Rhaenyra. If he thought to receive a hero's welcome, he was disappointed. Queen Alicent went pale when she heard what he had done, crying, "Mother, have mercy on us all." Nor was Sir Otto pleased. "You only lost one eye," he is reported to have said. "How could you be so blind?" The king himself did not share their concerns, however. Aegon too welcomed Prince Aemon home with a great feast, hailed him as the true blood of the dragon, and announced that he had made a good beginning. On Dragonstone, Queen Rhaenyra collapsed when told of Luke's death. Luke's younger brother Joffrey, Jace, was still away on his mission north. Joffrey swore a terrible oath of vengeance against Prince Aemond and Lord Boros. Only the intervention of the sea snake and Princess Rhaenys kept the boy from mounting his dragon at once. Mushroom would have us believe he played a part as well, as the Black Council sat to consider how to strike back. A raven arrived from Harrenhal. An eye for an eye, a son for a son. Prince Daemon wrote, "Lucerys shall be avenged." Let it not be forgotten in his youth, Daemon Targaryen had been the prince of the city, his face and laugh familiar to every cutpurse, whore, and gambler in Flea Bottom. The prince still had friends in the low places of King's Landing and followers amongst the gold cloaks. Unbeknownst to King Aegon, the Hand, or the Queen Dowager, he had allies at court as well, even on the Green Council, and one other go between, a special friend he trusted utterly, who knew the wine sinks and rat pits that festered in the shadow of the Red Keep, as well as Damon himself once had, and moved easily through the shadows of the city. To this pale stranger, he reached out now, by secret ways, to set a terrible vengeance into motion. Amidst the stews of Flea Bottom, Prince Damon's go between found suitable instruments. One had been a sergeant of the city watch, big and brutal. He had lost his gold cloak for beating a whore to death whilst in a drunken rage. The other was a rat catcher in the Red Keep. Their true names are lost to history. They are remembered, what that they were not, as blood and cheese. Cheese knew the red keep better than the shape of his own cock, Mushroom tells us. The hidden doors and secret tunnels that Magor the Cruel had built were as familiar to the rat catcher as to the rats he hunted. Using a forgotten passageway, Cheese led Blood into the heart of the castle, unseen by any guard. Some say their quarry was the king himself, but Aegon was accompanied by the king's guard wherever he went, and even Cheese knew of no way in and out of Magor's holdfast, save over the drawbridge that spanned the dry moat and its formidable iron spikes. The Tower of the Hand was less secure. The two men crept up through the walls, bypassing the spearmen posted at the tower doors. Sir Otto's rooms were of no interest to them. Instead, they slipped into his daughter's chambers, one floor below. Queen Alicent had taken up residence there after the death of King Viserys, when her son Aegon moved into Maegor's holdfast with his own queen. Once inside, Cheese bound and gagged the dowager queen, whilst Blood strangled her bedmate. Then they settled down to wait, for they knew it was the custom of Queen Helena to bring her children to see their grandmother every evening before bed. Blind to her danger, the queen appeared as dusk was settling over the castle. Accompanied by her three children, Jaehaerys and Jaehaera were 6, Maelor 2. As they entered the apartments, Helena was holding his little hand and calling out her mother's name. Blood barred the door and slew the queen's guardsmen, whilst Cheese appeared to snatch up Maelor. Scream, and you all die, Blood told her grace. Queen Helena kept her calm, it is said. Who are you? She demanded of the two. Debt collectors, said Cheese. An eye for an eye, a son for a son. We only want the one. To square things. Won't hurt the rest of you fine folks. Not one little hair. Which one you want to lose, your grace? Once she realized what he meant, Queen Helena pleaded with the men to kill her instead. A wife's not a son, said Blood. It has to be a boy. Cheese warned the queen to make a choice soon, before Blood grew bored and raped her little girl. Pick, he said, or we kill them all. On her knees, weeping, Helena named her youngest Maelor. Perhaps she thought the boy was too young to understand, or perhaps it was because the older boy, Jaehaerys, was King Aegon's firstborn son and heir, next in line to the Iron Throne. You hear that, little boy? Cheese whispered to Maelor. Your mama wants you dead. Then he gave Blood a grin, and the hulking swordsman slew Prince Jaehaerys, striking off the boy's head with a single blow. The queen began to scream. Strange to say, the rat catcher and the butcher were true to their word. They did no further harm to Queen Helena or her surviving children, but rather fled with the prince's head in hand. A hue and cry wept up, but Cheese knew the secret passageways as the guards did not, and the killers made their escape. 2 days later, Blood was seized at the gate of the gods trying to leave King's Landing with the head of Prince Jaehaerys hidden in one of his saddle sacks. Under torture, he confessed that he had been taken into Harrenhal to collect his reward from Prince Daemon. He also gave up a description of the whore he claimed had hired them, an older woman, foreign by her talk, cloaked and hooded, very pale. The other harlots called her Misery. After 13 days of torment, Blood was at last allowed to die. Queen Alicent had commanded Larys Clubfoot to learn his true name, so that she might bathe in the blood of his wife and children. But sources do not say if this occurred. Sir Luther Largent in his gold cloak searched the streets of Silk from top to bottom, and turned out and stripped every harlot in King's Landing, but no trace of Cheese or the White Worm was ever found. In his grief and fury, King Aegon II commanded that all the city's rat catchers be taken out and hanged, and this was done. Sir Otto Hightower brought 100 cats into the Red Keep to take their place. Though Blood and Cheese had spared her life, Queen Helena cannot be said to have survived that fateful dusk. Afterward, she would not eat, nor bathe, nor leave her chambers, and she could no longer stand to look upon her son, Maelor, knowing that she had named him to die. The king had no recourse but to take the boy from her and give him over to their mother, the Dowager Queen Alicent, to raise as if he were her own. Aegon and his wife slept separately thereafter, and Queen Helena sank deeper and deeper into madness, whilst the king raged and drank and raged. The Dance of the Dragons entered a new stage after the death of Lucerys Velaryon in the Stormlands and the murder of Prince Jaehaerys before his mother's eyes in the Red Keep. For both the Blacks and the Greens, blood called to blood for vengeance, and all across the realm, lords called their banners, and armies gathered and began to march. In the Riverlands, raiders out to Raventree flying to Rhaenyra's banners crossed into the lands of House Bracken, burning crops, driving off sheep and cattle, sacking villages, and despoiling every set that came on. The Blackwoods were one of the last houses south of the Neck who still followed the old gods. When the Brackens gathered a strong force to strike back, Lord Samwell Blackwood surprised them on the march, taking them unawares as they camped beneath a riverside mill. In the fight that followed, the mill was put to the torch, and men fought and died for hours, bathed in the red light of the flames. Sir Amos Bracken, leading the host from Stonehenge, cut down and slew Lord Blackwood in single combat, only to perish himself when a weirwood arrow found the eye slit of his helm and drove deep into his skull. Supposedly, that shaft was loosed by Lord Samwell's 16-year-old sister Alysanne, who would later be known as Black Ally. But whether this was fact or mere family legend cannot be known. Many other grievous losses were suffered by both sides in what became known as the Battle of the Burning Mill. And when the Brackens finally broke and fled back onto their own lands, under the command of Sir Amos's bastard half brother, Sir Raylon Rivers, it was only to find that Stonehenge had taken in their absence, led by Prince Damon on Caraxes. A strong host made of dairies, roots, pipers, and frays had captured the castle by storm in the absence of so much of House Bracken's strength. Lord Humphrey Bracken and his remaining children had been made captive, along with his third wife and baseborn paramour. Rather than see them come to harm, Sir Raylan yielded. With House Bracken thus broken and defeated, the last of King Aegon's supporters in the Riverlands lost heart and laid down their own swords as well. Yet it must not be thought that the Green Council was sitting idle. Sir Otto Hightower had been busy as well, winning over lords, hiring sellswords, strengthening the defences of King's Landing, and assiduously seeking after other alliances. After the rejection of Grand Maester Orwyle's peace overtures, the Han redoubled his efforts, dispatching ravens to Winterfell and the Erie to River One, White Harbour, Goldtown, Bitterbridge, Fair Isle, and half a hundred other keeps and castles. Riders galloped through the night to holdings closer to hand, to summon their lords and ladies to court to do fealty to King Aegon. Sir Otto also reached out to Dawn, whose ruling prince, Corin Martell, had once warred against Prince Daemon in the Stepstones. But Prince Corin spurned his offer. Dawn has danced with dragons before, he said. I would sooner sleep with scorpions. Yet Sir Otto was losing the trust of his king, who mistook his efforts for inaction and his caution for cowardice. Septon Eustace tells us of one occasion when Aegon entered the Tower of the Hand and found Sir Otto writing another letter, whereupon he knocked the inkpot into his grandsire's lap, declaring, Thrones are won with swords, not quills, spill blood, not ink. The fall of Harrenhal to Prince Daemon came as a great shock to his grace, Munkin tells us. Until that moment, Aegon too had believed his half-sister's cause to be hopeless. Harrenhal left his grace feeling vulnerable for the first time. The subsequent defeat at the Burning Mill and Stonehenge came as further blows and made the king realize that his situation was more perilous than it seemed. These fears deepened as ravens returned from the Reach, where the Greens had believed themselves strongest. House Hightower and Oldtown were solidly behind King Aegon, and his grace had the arbor too. But elsewhere in the south, other lords were declaring for Rhaenyra. Amongst them, Lord Costain of Three Towers, Lord Mullendore of Uplands, Lord Tarley of Hornhill, Lord Rowan of Golden Grove, and Lord Grim of Greyshield. Loudest amongst these traitors was Sir Alan Beesbury, Lord Lyman's heir, who was demanding the release of his grandsire from the dungeon where most believed the former master of coin to be confined. Faced with such a clamor from their own bannermen, the Castellan steward and mother of the young Lord Tyrell of Highgarden, acting as regents for the boy, suddenly thought better of their support for King Aegon and decided House Tyrell would take no part in the struggle. King Aegon began to drown his fears in strong wine. Septon Eustace tells us Sir Otto sent word to his nephew, Lord Ormond Hightower, beseeching him to use the power of Oldtown to put down this rash of rebellions in the Reach. Other blows followed: the Vale, White Harbor, Winterfell, the Blackwoods, and the other river lords streamed toward Harrenhal and Prince Daemon's banners. The sea snake's fleet closed Blackwater Bay, and every morning King Aegon had merchants whining at him. His grace had no answer for their complaints beyond another cup of strong wine. Do something, he demanded of Sir Otto. The hand assured him that something was being done. He had hatched a plan to break the Valarian blockade. One of the chief pillars of support for Rhaenyra's claim was her consort, yet Prince Daemon represented one of her greatest weaknesses as well. The prince had made more foes than friends during the course of his adventures. Sir Otto Hightower, who had been amongst the first of those foes, reached across the narrow sea to another of the prince's enemies, the kingdom of the Three Daughters. By itself, the royal fleet lacked the strength to break the sea snake's chokehold on the gullet, and King Aegon's overtures to Dalton Greyjoy of Pike had thus far failed to win the Iron Islands to his side. The combined fleets of Tyrosh, Lys, and Myr would be more than a match for the Valerians, however. Sir Otto sent word to the Magisters, promising exclusive trade rights at King's Landing if they would clear the gullet of the sea snake's ships and open the sea lanes once again. To add savor to the stew, he also promised to cede the stepstones to the Three Daughters, though in truth, the Iron Throne had never claimed those isles. The triarchy was never quick to move, however. Lacking a true king, all important decisions in this three-headed kingdom were decided by the High Council, 11 magisters from each city, made up by its membership, every man of them intent on demonstrating his own sagacity, shrewdness, and importance, and winning every possible advantage for his own city. Grandmaster Graydon, who wrote the definitive history of the Kingdom of the Three Daughters 50 years later, described it as 33 horses, each pulling in his own direction. Even issues as timely as war, peace, and alliance were subject to endless debate, and the High Council was not even in session when Sir Otto's envoys arrived. The delay did not sit well with the young king. Aegon too had run short of patience with his grandfather's prevarications, though his mother, the Dowager Queen Alicent, spoke up in Otto's defense. His Grace turned a deaf ear to her pleading. Summoning Sir Otto to the throne room, he tore the chain of office from his neck and tossed it to Sir Criston Cole. My new hand is a steel fist, he boasted. We are done with writing letters. Sir Criston Cole wasted no time in proving his mettle. It is not for you to plead for support from your lords like a beggar pleading for alms, he told Aegon. You are the lawful king of Westeros, and those who deny it are traitors. It is past time they learn the price of treason. First to pay the price were the captive lords languishing in the dungeons under the Red Keep, men who had once sworn to defend the rights of Princess Rhaenyra and still stubbornly refused to bend the knee to King Aegon. One by one, they were dragged out into the castle ward, where the king's justice awaited them with his axe. Each man was given one final chance to swear fealty to his grace. Only Lord Butterwell, Lord Stokeworth, and Lord Rosby chose to do so. Lord Hayford, Lord Merryweather, Lord Hart, Lord Buckler, Lord Caswell, and Lady Fell valued their sworn word more than their lives, and were beheaded each in turn, along with 8 landed knights and 20 servants and retainers. Their heads were mounted on spikes above the city gates. King Aegon also desired to avenge the murder of his heir by blood and cheese by means of an attack on Dragonstone, descended on the island citadel on Dragonback to seize or slay his half-sister and her bastard sons. It took all of the Green Council to dissuade him. Sir Kristen Cole urged a different course. The pretended princess has made use of stealth and treachery to kill Prince Jaehaerys, Cole said. Let them do the same. We will pay the princess back in her own bloody coin, he told the king. The instrument the Lord Commander of the King's Guard chose for the king's vengeance was his sworn brother, Sir Eric Cargill. Sir Eric was intimately familiar with the ancient siege of House Targaryen, having visited there often during the reign of King Viserys. Many fishermen still plied the waters of Blackwater Bay, for Dragonstone depended on the sea for sustenance. It would be a simple thing to deliver Cargill to the fishing village under the castle. From there, he would make his own way to the Queen, and Sir Eric and his brother, Sir Eric, were twins, identical in all respects. Not even their fellows of the King's Guard could tell the two apart. Both Mushroom and Septon Eustace assert. Once clad in white, Sir Eric would be able to move freely about Dragonstone, Sir Kristen Cole suggested. Any guards who chanced to encounter him would surely mistake him for his brother. Sir Eric did not undertake this mission happily. Indeed, Septon Eustace tells us the troubled knight visited the Red Keep Sept on the night he was to sail to pray for forgiveness to our mother above. Yet as Kingsguard sworn to obey king and commander, he had no choice in honour but to make his way to Dragonstone, clad in the salt-stained garb of a simple fisherman. The true purpose of Sir Eric's mission remains a matter of some contention. Grand Maester Monkin tells us that Cargill had been commanded to slay Rhaenyra, putting an end to her rebellion at a stroke, while Mushroom insists that her sons were Cargill's prey. That Aegon too wished to wash out the blood of his murdered son with that of his bastard nephews, Jacaerys and Joffrey Strong. Sir Eric came ashore without hindrance, donned his armour and white cloak, and had no trouble gaining entrance to the castle in the guise of his twin brother, just as Kristen Cole had planned. Deep in the heart of Dragonstone, however, as he is making his way to the royal apartments, the gods brought him face to face with Sir Eric himself, who knew at once what his brother's presence meant. The singers tell us that Sir Eric said, "I love you, brother," as he unsheathed his blade, and that Sir Eric replied, "And I you, brother," as he drew his own. The twins battled for the best part of an hour. Grand Maester Monkin says, the clash of steel on steel woke half the Queen's court, but the onlookers could only stand by helplessly and watch, for no man there could tell which brother was which. In the end, Sir Eric and Sir Eric dealt each other mortal wounds and died in one another's arms, with tears upon their cheeks. Mushroom's account is shorter, saltier, and altogether nastier. The fight lasted only moments, Arthur says. There were no declarations of brotherly love. Sir Cargill denounced the other as a traitor as they clashed. Sir Eric, standing above his twin on the spiral steps, struck the first mortal blow, a savage downward cut that nigh cut his brother's sword arm off at the shoulder. But as he collapsed, Sir Eric grasped his slayer's white cloak and pulled him close enough to drive a dagger deep into his belly. Sir Eric was dead before the first guards arrived, but Sir Eric took 4 days to die of his gut wound, screaming in horrible pain and cursing his traitor brother all the while. For obvious reasons, singers and storytellers have shown a marked preference for the tale as told by Monken. Maesters and other scholars must make their own determination as to which version is more likely. All that Septim Eustace says upon the matter is that the cargo twins slew each other, and there we must leave it. Back in King's Landing, King Aegon's Master of Whispers, Larys Strong the Clubfoot, had drawn up a list of all those lords who gathered on Dragonstone to attend Queen Rhaenyra's coronation and sit on her Black Council. Lord Celtigar and Valerian had their seats on islands, as Aegon too had no strength at sea. They were beyond the reach of his wrath. Those black lords, whose lands were on the mainland, enjoyed no such protection, however. With 100 knights and 500 men at arms of the royal household, augmented by 3 times as many hard and sellswords, Sir Christian marched on Rosby and Stokeworth, whose lords had only recently repented of their allegiance to the Queen, commanded them to prove their loyalty by adding their power to his own. Thus augmented, Cole's host advanced upon the walled harbour town of Duskendale, where they took the defenders by surprise. The town was sacked, the ships in the harbour set afire, Lord Darkling beheaded. His household knights and garrison were given the choice between swearing their swords to King Aegon or charging their lord's fate. Most chose the former. Rook's Rest was Sir Christian's next objective. Forewarned of their coming, Lord Staunton closed his gates and defied the attackers. Behind his walls, his lordship could only watch as his fields and woods and villages were burned, his sheep and cattle and small folk put to the sword. When provisions inside the castle began to run low, he dispatched a raven to Dragonstone, pleading for succor. The bird arrived as Rhaenyra and her blacks were mourning Sir Eric and debating the proper response to Aegon the Usurper's latest attack. Though shaken by this attempt on her life, or the lives of her sons, the Queen was still reluctant to attack King's Landing. Monken, who it must be remembered wrote many years later, says this was because of her horror of Kingslain. Maegor the Cruel had slain his own nephew Aegon, and had been cursed thereafter, until he bled his life away upon that stolen throne. Septon Eustace claims Rhaenyra had a mother's heart that made her reluctant to risk the lives of her remaining sons. Mushroom alone was present for these councils, however, and the fool insists that Rhaenyra was still so grief-sick over the death of her son Lucerys that she absented herself from the war council, giving over her command to the sea snake and his wife, Princess Rhaenys. Here, Mushroom's version seems most likely, for we know that 9 days after Staunton dispatched his plea for help, the sound of leathern wings was heard across the sea, and the dragon, Meleys, appeared above Rook's Rest. The Red Queen, she was called, for the scarlet scales that covered her. The membranes of her wings were pink, her crest, horns, and claws bright as copper, and on her back in steel and copper armor that flashed in the sun rode Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was. Sir Criston Cole was not dismayed. Aegon's hand had expected this, counted on it. Drums beat out a command, and archers rushed forward, longbowmen and crossbowmen both, filling the air with arrows and quarrels. Scorpions were cranked upward to loose iron bolts of the sort that had once felled Meraxes and Dorne. Melee suffered a score of hits, but the arrows only served to make her angry. She swept down, spitting fire to right and left. Knights burned in their saddles as the hair and hide and harness of their horses went up in flames. Men at arms dropped their spears and scattered. Some tried to hide behind the shields, but neither oak nor iron could withstand dragon's breath. Sir Crispin sat on his white horse, shouting, "Aim for the rider!" Through the smoke and flame, Maylis roared, smoke swirling from her nostrils, a stallion kicking in her jaws as tongues of fire engulfed him. Then came an answering roar. Two more winged shapes appeared. The king astride Sunfire the Golden, and his brother Aemond upon Vhagar. Criston Cole had sprung his trap, and Rhaenys had come snatching at the bait. Now the teeth closed round her. Princess Rhaenys made no attempt to flee. With a glad cry and a crack of her whip, she turned Maylis towards the foe. Against Vhagar alone, she might have had some chance, but against Vhagar and Sunfire together, doom was certain. The dragons met violently 1,000 feet above the field of battle, as balls of fire burst and blossomed, so bright that men swore later that the sky was full of suns. The crimson jaws of Maylis closed around Sunfire's golden neck for a moment, till Vhagar fell upon them from above. All three beasts went spinning toward the ground. They struck the ground so hard the stones fell from the battlements of Rook's Rest half a league away. Those closest to the dragons did not live to tell the tale. Those farther off could not see for the flame and smoke. It was hours before the fires gutted out, but from those ashes only Vhagar rose unharmed. Maylis was dead, broken by the fall and ripped to pieces upon the ground, and Sunfire, that splendid golden beast, had one wing half torn from his body, whilst his royal rider had suffered broken ribs, a broken hip, and burns that covered half his body. His left arm was the worst. The dragon flame had burned so hot that the king's armor had melted into his flesh. A body believed to be Rhaenys Targaryen was later found beside the carcass of her dragon, but it was so blackened that no one could be sure it was her, beloved daughter of Lady Jocelyn Baratheon and Prince Aemon Targaryen, faithful wife to Lord Corlys Velaryon, mother and grandmother. The queen who never was lived fearlessly and died amidst blood and fire. She was 55 years old. 800 knights and squires and common men lost their lives that day as well. Another 100 perished not long after, when Prince Aemon and Sir Criston Cole took Rook's Rest and put its garrison to death. Lord Staunton's head was carried back to King's Landing and mounted above the old gate. But it was the head of the dragon Maylis, drawn through the city on a cart, that awed the crowds of small folk into silence. Septon Eustace tells us that thousands left King's Landing afterward, until the Dowager Queen Alicent ordered the city gates closed and barred. King Aegon II did not die, though his burns brought him such pain that some say he prayed for death. Carried back to King's Landing in a closed litter to hide the extent of his injuries. His grace did not rise from his bed for the rest of the year. Septons prayed for him, maces attended him with potions and milk of the poppy, but Aegon slept 9 hours out of every 10, waking only long enough to take some meager nourishment before he slept again. None was allowed to disturb his rest, save his mother. The Queen Dowager in his hand, Sir Criston Cole. His wife never so much as made the attempt. So lost was Helena in her own grief and madness. The king's dragon, Sunfire, too huge and heavy to be moved, and unable to fly with his injured wing, remained in the fields beyond Rook's Rest, crawling through the ashes like some great golden worm. In the early days, he fed himself upon the burned carcasses of the slain. When those were gone, the men Sir Kirsten Gold had left behind to guard him brought him calves and sheep. You must rule the realm now until your brother is strong enough to take the crown again. The king's hand told Prince Aemon. Nor did Sir Kristen need to say it twice, writes Eustace. And so one-eyed Aemon, the kinslayer, took upon the iron and ruby crown of Aegon the Conqueror. It looks better on me than it ever did on him, the prince proclaimed. Yet Aemon did not assume the style of king, but named himself only protector of the realm and prince regent. Sir Kristen Cole remained hand of the king. Meanwhile, the seeds Jacaerys Velaryon had planted on his flight north had begun to bear fruit, and men were gathering at White Harbor, Winterfell, Barrowton, Sisterton, Gulltown, and the Gates of the Moon. Should they join their strength to that of the River Lords assembling at Harrenhal with Prince Daemon, even the strong walls of King's Landing might not be able to withstand them. Sir Kristen warned the new Prince Regent. The tidings from the south were ominous as well. Obedient to his uncle's entreaties, Lord Ormond Hightower had issued forth from Old Town with 1,000 knights, 1,000 archers, 3,000 men at arms, and uncounted thousands of camp followers, sellswords, free riders, and rabble, only to find themselves set upon by Sir Alan Beesbury and Lord Alan Tarley. Though commanding a far Though commanding far fewer men, the two Allans harassed him day and night, raiding his camps, murdering his scouts, setting fires in his line of march. Further south, Lord Costain had issued forth from Three Towers to fall upon Hightower's baggage train. Worse, reports had reached his lordship that a host equal in size to his own was descending on the Mander led by Thaddeus Rowan, Lord of Golden Grove. Lord Ormond had therefore decided he could not proceed without support from King's Landing. We have need of your dragons, he wrote. Supremely confident in his own prowess as a warrior and the might of his dragon Vagar, Aemon was eager to take the battle to the foe. The whore on Dragonstone is not the threat, he said. No more than Rowan and these traitors in the Reach. The danger is my uncle. Once Daemon is dead, all these fools flying our sisters' banners will run back to their castles and trouble us no more. East of Blackwater Bay, Queen Rhaenyra was also faring badly. The death of her son Lucerys had been a crushing blow to a woman already broken by pregnancy, labor, and stillbirth. When word reached Dragonstone that Princess Rhaenys had fallen, angry words were exchanged between the queen and Lord Velaryon, who blamed her for his wife's death. It should have been you, the sea snake shouted at her grace. Staunton sent to you, yet you left it to my wife to answer and forbade your sons to join her. For all the castle knew that the Princes Jace and Joff had been eager to fly with Princess Rhaenys to Rook's Rest with their own dragons. Only I could lighten her grace's heart, Mushroom claims in his testimony. In this dark hour, I became the queen's counselor, setting aside my full scepter and pointed hat to lend her all my wisdom and compassion. Unbeknownst to all, it was the jester who ruled them now, an invisible king in motley. These are large claims for a small man, and ones not borne out by any of our other chroniclers, no more than by the facts. Her grace was far from alone. 4 living sons remained to her. My strength and my consolation, the queen called them. Aegon the Younger and Viserys. Prince Daemon's sons were 9 and 7, respectively. Prince Joffrey was but 11, but Jacaerys, Prince of Dragonstone, was on the cusp of his 15th name day. It was Jace who came to the fore now, late in the year 129 AC, mindful of the promise he made to the Maiden of the Vale. He ordered Prince Joffrey to fly to Gulltown with Tyraxes. Munkin suggests that Jace's desire to keep his brother far from the fighting was paramount in his decision. This did not sit well with Joffrey, who was determined to prove himself in battle. Only when told that he was being sent to defend the Vale against King Aegon's dragons did his brother grudgingly consent to go. Rhaena, the 13-year-old daughter of Prince Daemon by Laena Velaryon, was chosen to accompany him. Known as Rhaena of Pentos for the city of her birth, she was no dragon rider, her hatchling having died some years before. But she brought 3 dragon's eggs with her to the Vale, where she prayed nightly for their hatching. Lady Rhaena's twin, Baela, remained on Dragonstone. Long betrothed to Prince Jacaerys, she refused to leave him, insisting that she would fight beside him on her own dragon, though Moondancer was too small to bear her weight. Though Baela also announced her intent to marry Jace at once, no wedding was ever held. Munkin says the prince did not wish to wed until the war was over, whilst Mushroom claims Jacaerys was already married to Sarah Snow, the mysterious bastard girl from Winterfell. The Prince of Dragonstone also had a care for the safety of his half brothers, Aegon the Younger and Viserys, aged 9 and 7. Their father, Prince Daemon, had made many friends in the city of Pentos during his visits there, so Jacaerys reached across the narrow sea to the prince of that city, who agreed to foster the 2 boys until Rhaenyra had secured the Iron Throne. In the waning days of 129 AC, the young princes boarded the cog Gay abandoned, Aegon with Stormcloud, Viserys clutching his egg to set sail for Essos. The sea snake sent 7 of his warships with them as escort to see that they reached Pentos safely. Prince Jacaerys soon brought the Lord of the Tides back into the fold by naming him the Hand of the Queen. Together, he and Lord Corlys began to plan an assault upon King's Landing. With Sunfire wounded near Rook's Rest and unable to fly, and Tessarion with Prince Daemon in Old Town, only 2 mature dragons remained to defend King's Landing, and Dreamfire's rider, Queen Helena, spent her days in darkness, weeping, and surely could not be counted on as a threat. That left only Vhagar. No living dragon could No living dragon could match Vhagar for size or ferocity. But Jace reasoned that if Vermax, Cyrax, and Caraxes were to descend on King's Landing, even that hoary old bitch would be unable to withstand them. Mushroom was less certain. 3 is more than 1, the dwarf claims to have told the Prince of Dragonstone. But 4 is more than 3. And 6 is more than 4, even a fool knows that. When Jace pointed out that Stormcloud had never been ridden, that Moondancer was but a hatchling, that Tyraxes was far away in the Vale with Prince Joffrey, and demanded to know where Mushroom proposed to find more dragons, the dwarf tells us he laughed and said, "Under the sheets and in the woodpiles, wherever you Targaryens spilled your silver seed." House Targaryen had ruled Dragonstone for more than 200 years since Lord Aenar Targaryen first arrived from Valyria with his dragons. Though it had always been their custom to wed brother to sister and cousin to cousin, young blood runs hot, and it was not unbeknownst for men of the house to seek their pleasures amongst the daughters, and even the wives, of their subjects. The small folk had lived in the villages below the Dragonmont, tillers of the land and fishers of the sea. Indeed, until the reign of King Jaehaerys, the ancient rite of the first night had been invoked mayhaps more oft on Dragonstone than anywhere else in the Seven Kingdoms, though good Queen Alysanne would surely have been shocked to hear it. Though the first night was greatly resented elsewhere, as Queen Alysanne had learned in her women's councils, such feelings were muted upon Dragonstone, where Targaryens were rightly regarded as being closer to gods than the common run of men. Here, brides thus blessed upon the wedding nights were envied, and the children born of such unions were esteemed above all others, for the lords of Dragonstone oft celebrated the birth of such with lavish gifts of gold and silk and land to the mother. These happy bastards were said to have been born of dragon seed, and in time became known simply as seeds. Even after the end of the rite of the first night, certain Targaryens continued to dally with the daughters of innkeeps and the wives of fishermen, so seeds and the son of seeds were plentiful on Dragonstone. It was to them that Prince Jacaerys turned, at the urging of his fool, vowing that any man who could master a dragon could be granted lands and riches and dubbed a knight. His sons would be ennobled, his daughters wed to lords, and he himself would have the honor of fighting beside the Prince of Dragonstone against the pretender Aegon II Targaryen and his treasonous supporters. Not all who came forward in answer to the prince's call were seeds, nor even the sons or grandsons of seeds. A score of the queen's own household knights offered themselves as dragon riders, amongst them the lord commander of her queen's guard, Sir Stephen Darklyn, along with squires, scullions, sailors, men-at-arms, mummers, and two maids. The sowing of the seed, Monken names the triumphs and tragedies that ensued, crediting the notion to Jacaerys himself, not Mushroom. Others prefer the red sowing. The most unlikely of these would be dragon riders, was Mushroom himself, whose testimony speaks at length of his attempt to mount old Silverwing, judged to be the most docile of the masterless dragons. One of the dwarf's more amusing tales, it ends with Mushroom running across the ward of Dragonstone with the seat of his pantaloons on fire and nigh drowning when he leapt into a well to quench the flames. Unlikely, to be sure. But it does provide a droll moment in what was otherwise a ghastly business. Dragons are not horses. They do not easily accept men upon their backs, and when angered or threatened, they attack. Monken's truth telling tells us that 16 men lost their lives during the sowing. 3 times that number were burned or maimed. Stefan Darklin was burned to death whilst attempting to mount the dragon's sea smoke. Lord Gorman Massey suffered the same fate when approaching Vermithor. A man called Silver Dennis, whose hair and eyes lent credence to his claim to be descended from bastard of Magor the Cruel, had an arm torn off by sheep stealer. As his sons struggled to staunch the wound, the cannibal descended on them, drove off sheep stealer, and devoured father and sons alike. Yet Sea Smoke, Vermithor, and Silverwing were accustomed to men intolerant of their presence. Having once been ridden, they were more accepting of new riders. Vermithor, the old king's own dragon, bent his neck to a blacksmith's bastard, a towering man called Hugh the Hammer, or Hard Hugh, whilst a pale-haired man-at-arms named Ulf the White for his hair, or Ulf the Sword for his drinking, mounted Silverwing, beloved of good Queen Alysanne, and Seasmoke, who had once borne Laenor Velaryon, took onto his back a boy of 10 and 5, known as Adam of Hull, whose origins remain a matter of dispute amongst historians to this day. Adam and his brother Alan, 1 year younger, had been born to a woman named Marilda, the pretty young daughter of a shipwright, a familiar sight about her father's shipyards. The girl was better known as Mouse, for she was small, quick, and always underfoot. She was still 16 when she gave birth to Adam in 114 AC, and barely 18 when Alan followed in 115. Small and quick as their mother, these bastards of Hull were both silver of hair and purple of eye, and soon proved to have sea salt in their blood as well, growing up in their grandsire's shipyard and going to sea as ship's boys before the age of 8. When Adam was 10 and Alan was 9, the mother inherited the yards upon her own father's death, sold them, and used the coin to take the sea herself as the mistress of a trading cog called Mouse, a canny trader and daring captain. By 130 AC, Marilda of Hull owned 7 ships, and her bastard sons were always serving on one or the other. That Adam and Alan were dragon seed, no man who looked upon them could doubt, though their mother steadfastly refused to name their father. Only when Prince Jacaerys put out the call for new dragon riders did Marilda at last break her silence, claiming both boys were the natural sons of the late Laenor Velaryon. They had his look, it was true, and Sir Laenor had been known to visit the shipyard in Hull from time to time. Nonetheless, many on Dragonstone and Driftmark were skeptical of Marilda's claim, for Laenor Velaryon's disinterest in women was well remembered. None dared name her liar, however, for it was Laenor's own father, Lord Corlys himself, who brought the boys to Prince Jacaerys for the sowing. Having outlived all his children and suffered the betrayal of his nephews and cousins, the sea snake seemed more than eager to accept these new-found grandsons. And when Adam of Hall mounted Sir Laenor's dragon Sea Smoke, it seemed to prove the truth of his mother's claims. It should not surprise us, therefore, that Grand Master it should not surprise us, therefore, that Grand Maester Munkin and Septon Eustace both dutifully assert Laenor's parentage, but Mushroom as ever dissents. In his testimony, the fool puts forth the notion that the little mice had been sired not by the sea snake's son, but by the sea snake himself. Lord Corlys did not share Sir Laenor's erotic predispositions, he points out, and the whole shipyards were likened to a second home to him, whereas his son visited them less frequently. Princess Rhaenys, his wife, had the fiery temperament of many Targaryens, Mushroom says, and would not have taken kindly to her lord husband fathering bastards on a girl half her age, and a shipwright's daughter besides. Therefore, his lordship had prudently ended his shipyard trysts with Mouse after Alan's birth, commanding her to keep her boys far from court. Only after the death of Princess Rhaenys did Lord Corlys at last feel able to bring his bastard safely forward. In this instant, it must be said, the tale told by the fool seems more likely than the versions offered by Septon and Maester. Many more at Queen Rhaenyra's court must surely have suspected the same. If so, they held their tongues. Not long after Adam of Hall had proved himself by flying sea smoke, Lord Corlys went so far as to petition Queen Rhaenyra to remove the taint of bastardy from him and his brother. When Prince Jacaerys added his voice to the request, the Queen complied. Adam of Hall, dragon seed and bastard, became Adam Velaryon, heir to Driftmark. Yet that did not write an end to the red sowing. More and worse was yet to come, with dire consequences for the Seven Kingdoms. Dragonstone's 3 wild dragons were less easily claimed than those that had known previous riders. Yet attempts were made upon them all the same. Sheepstealer, a notably ugly mud-brown dragon, hatched when the old king was still young, had a taste for mutton. Swooping down on shepherds' flocks from Driftmark to the Wendwater, he seldom harmed the shepherds unless they attempted to interfere with him, but had been known to devour the occasional sheepdog. Grey Ghost dwelt in a smoking vent high on the eastern side of the Dragonmont, preferred fish, and was most oft glimpsed flying low over the narrow sea, snatching prey from the waters. A pale grey-white beast, the colour of morning mist, he was a notably shy dragon who avoided men and their works for years at a time. The largest and oldest of the wild dragons was the cannibal, so named because he had been known to feed on the carcasses of dead dragons and descended upon the hatcheries of Dragonstone to gorge himself on newborn hatchlings and eggs. Coal black, with baleful green eyes, the cannibal had made his lair on Dragonstone even before the coming of the Targaryens, some small folk claimed. Grand Maester Munkin and Septon Eustace both found this story most unlikely, as do I. Would-be dragon tamers had made attempts to ride him 12 times. His lair was littered with their bones. None of the dragon seeds were fool enough to disturb the cannibal. Any who were did not return to tell the tales. Some sought the grey ghost, but could not find him, for he was ever an elusive creature. Sheep Stealer proved easier to flush out, but he remained a vicious, ill-tempered beast who killed more seeds than the 3 castle dragons together. One who hoped to tame him, after his quest for grey ghost proved fruitless, was Allen of Hull. Sheep Stealer would have none of him. When he stumbled from the dragon's lair with his cloak of flame, only his brother's swift action saved his life. Sea Smoke drove the wild dragon off, as Adam used his own cloak to beat out the flames. Alan Valerian would carry the scars of the encounter on his back and legs for the rest of his long life. Yet he counted himself fortunate, for he had lived. Many of the other seeds and seekers who aspired to ride upon Sheepstealer's back ended in Sheepstealer's belly instead. In the end, the brown dragon was brought to heel by the cunning and persistence of a small brown girl of 6 and 10, who delivered him a freshly slaughtered sheep every morning until Sheepstealer learned to accept and expect her. Monken sets down the name of this unlikely dragon rider as Nettles. Mushroom tells us the girl was a bastard of uncertain birth called Nettie, born to a dockside whore. By any name, she was black-haired, brown-eyed, brown-skinned, skinny, foul-mouthed, fearless, and the first and last rider of the dragon Sheepstealer. Thus did Prince Jaehaerys achieve his goal. For all the death and pain it caused, the widows left behind, the burned men who would carry their skulls until the day they died, 4 new dragon riders had been found. As 129 AC drew to a close, the prince prepared to fly against King's Landing. The date he chose for the attack was the first full moon of the new year. Yet the plans of men are but playthings to the gods, for even as Jace laid his plans, a new threat was closing from the east. The schemes of Otto Hightower had borne fruit, meeting in Tyrosh. The High Council of the Triarchy had accepted his offer of alliance. 90 warships swept from the stepstones under the banners of the 3 daughters, bending their oars for the gullet. And as chance and the gods would have it, the Pentoshi Cog Gay Abandon carried 2 Targaryen princes sailed straight into their teeth. The escorts sent to protect the cog were sunk or taken, the Gay Abandon captured. The tale reached Dragonstone only when Prince Aegon arrived, desperately clinging to the neck of his dragon Stormcloud. The boy was white with terror, Mushroom tells us, shaking like a leaf and stinking of piss. Only 9. He had never flown before and would never fly again. For Stormcloud had been terribly wounded as he fled the Gay Abandon, arriving with the stubs of countless arrows embedded in his belly and a scorpion bolt through his neck. He died within the hour, hissing as the hot blood gushed black and smoking from his wounds. Aegon's younger brother, Prince Viserys, had no way of escaping from the cog. A clever boy, he hid his dragon's egg and changed into ragged, salt-stained clothing, pretended to be no more than a common ship's boy. But one of the real ship's boys betrayed him, and he was made a captive. It was a Tyroshi captain who first realized whom he was, Monken writes. But the admiral of the fleet, Sharako Lohar of Lys, soon relieved him of his prize. The Lysine admiral divided his fleet for the attack. One pincer was to enter the gullet south of Dragonstone, the other to the north. In the early morning hours of the 5th day of the 130th year since Aegon's conquest, battle was joined. Shirako's warships swept in with the rising sun behind them. Hidden by the glare, they took many of Lord Valerian's galleys unawares, ramming some and swarming aboard others with ropes and grapnels, leaving Dragonstone unmolested. The southern squadron fell upon the shoals of Driftmark. landing men at Spicetown and sending fire ships into the harbor to set ablaze the ships coming out to meet them. By mid-morning, Spicetown was burning, while Myrosh and Tyrosh troops battered at the very doors of high tide. When Prince Jacaerys swept down upon a line of Lycian galleys on Vermax, a rain of spears and arrows rose up to meet him. The sailors of the Triarchy had faced dragons before, whilst warring against Prince Daemon in the Stepstones. No man could fault their courage. They were prepared to meet Dragonflame with such weapons as they had. Kill the rider, and the dragon will depart. Their captors and commanders had told them. One ship took fire, and then another. Still, the men of the free cities fought on until a shout rang out, and they looked up to see more winged shapes coming around the dragon mont and turning toward them. It is one thing to face a dragon, another to face five, as Silverwing, Sheepstealer, Sea Smoke, and Vermithor descended upon them. The men of the Triarchy felt their courage desert them. The line of warships shattered as one galley after another turned away. The dragons fell like thunderbolts, spitting balls of fire, blue and orange, red and gold, each brighter than the next. Ship after ship burst asunder or was consumed by flames. Screaming men leapt into the sea, shrouded in fire. Tall columns of black smoke rose up from the water. All seemed lost, all was lost. Several differing tales were told afterward of how and why the dragons fell. Some claimed a crossbowman put an iron bolt through his eye, but this version seems suspiciously similar to the way Meraxes met her end long ago in Dawn. Another account tells us that a sailor in the crow's nest of a Mirish galley cast a grapnel as Vermax was swooping through the fleet. One of its prongs found purchase between two scales and was driven deep by the dragon's own considerable speed. The sailor had coiled his end of the chain about the mast, and the weight of the ship and the power of Vermax's wings tore a long jagged gash in the dragon's belly. The dragon's shriek of rage was heard as far off as Spicetown, even through the clangor of battle. His flight jerked to a violent end. Vermax went down, smoking and screaming, clawing at the water. Survivor said he struggled to rise, only to crash headlong into a burning galley. Wood splintered, the mast came tumbling down, and the dragon, thrashing, became entangled in the rigging. When the ship heeled over and sank, Vermax sank with her. It is said that Jacaerys Velaryon leapt free and clung to a piece of smoking wreckage for a few heartbeats, until some crossbowmen on the nearest mirror ship began loosing quarrels at him. The prince was struck once, and then again. More and more mermen brought crossbows to bear. Finally, one quarrel took him through the neck, and Jace was swallowed by the sea. The battle in the gullet raged in the night, north and south of Dragonstone, and remains amongst the bloodiest sea battles in all of history. Shrakaloha had taken a combined fleet of 90 Mirish, Lysini, and Tyroshi warships from the Stepstones. 28 survived to limp home, all but 3 crewed by Lyseni. In the aftermath, the windows of Mir and Tyrosh accused the admirals. It was the widows of Mir and Tyrosh accused the admiral of sending their fleet to destruction whilst holding back his own, beginning the quarrel that would spell the end of the Triarchy 2 years later when the 3 cities turned against each other in the Daughters' War, but that is outside the scope of this tale. Though the attackers bypassed Dragonstone, no doubt believing that the ancient Targaryen stronghold was too strong to assault, they exacted a grievous toll on Driftmark. Spicetown was brutally sacked. The bodies of men, women, and children butchered in the streets and left as fodder for gulls and rats and carrion crows. Its buildings burned. The town would never be rebuilt. High tide was put to the torch as well. All the treasures the sea snake had brought back from the east were consumed by fire. His servants cut down as they tried to flee the flames. The Valarian fleet lost almost a third of its strength. Thousands died, yet none of these losses were felt so deeply as that of Jacaerys Valarian, Prince of Dragonstone and heir to the Iron Throne. Rhaenyra's youngest son seemed lost as well. In the confusion of battle, none of the survivors seemed quite certain which ship Prince Viserys had been on. Men on both sides presumed him dead, drowned, or burned, or butchered, and though his brother Aegon the Younger had fled and lived, all the joy had gone out of the boy. He would never forgive himself for leaping onto Stormcloud and abandoning his little brother to the enemy. It is written that when the snake was congratulating him on his victory, the old man said, "If this be victory, I pray I never win another." Mushroom tells us there were two men on Dragonstone that night who drank to the slaughter in a smoky tavern beneath the castle. The dragon riders Hugh the Hammer and Ulf the White, who had flown Vermithor and Silverwing into battle and lived to boast of it. "We are knights now, truly," Hard Hugh declared. And Ulf laughed and said, "Fie on that. We should be lords." The girl Nettles did not share their celebrations. She had flown with the others, fought as bravely, burned and killed as they had, but her face was black with smoke and streaked with tears when she returned to Dragonstone. And Adam Valerion, lately Adam of Hull, sought out the sea snake after the battle. What they spoke to each other, even Mushroom does not say. A fortnight later in the Reach, Ormond Hightower found himself caught between two armies: Thaddeus Rowan, Lord of Golden Grove, and Tom Flowers, bastard of Bitterbridge, were bearing down on him from the northeast with a great host of mounted knights, while Sir Alan Beesbury, Lord Alan Tarley, and Lord Owen Costane had joined their power to cut off his retreat to Oldtown. When their hosts closed around him on the banks of the river Honeywine, attacking front and rear at once, Lord Hightower saw his lines crumble. Defeat seemed imminent, until a shadow swept across the battlefield, and a terrible roar resounded overhead, slicing through the sound of steel on steel. A dragon had come. I'm going to end it there. My question to you is, which dragon is it? Which dragon had come?